everyone, I'm Ashley Cannon Newell for Paper Tray Ink, and today I have 3 cards I'll be sharing with you, but one technique, and that's how to make garland using your dies. These are just examples of ways that I have used them on different projects, and I'll go a little bit more in detail towards the end of the video after I've gone through the step-by-step tutorial on how to actually make the garland. So for my example, I'm going to start with the little hot rod dies. Here they are. Here I have on my magnet sheet, and here is the coordinating stamp set to little hot rod. So I'll be using both of these for my example. So I'm going to get out my Cuttlebug here, and then I'm just going to have some vintage cream cardstock, and I'm just going to place a few of the little hot rod dies face down onto the cutting plate, which is the B plate there, and I'm just going to place them face down so I can just go ahead and run them through the die cutting machine and die cut them. Now for creating your own garland, I didn't say paper garland because you definitely could use felt for these as well. I'm going to be only showing examples using cardstock or patterned paper, but feel free to challenge yourself and do something creative with felt and fabric as well with your dies. Okay, so I run it forwards and then backwards. I just have a habit of doing that, and then make sure I get a nice clean cut when I die cut my dies. So I'm just going to remove my dies from the cardstock and put them back on my magnet sheet here, and then just pop these right on out. Alright, so now that I have my little hot rod die cuts already prepared, I'm going to take the coordinating stamp images and go ahead and stamp onto the die cuts. Now when you prepare your garland, easily you can just use patterned paper or solid cardstock using different dies that may not require stamping. I'm just using this example to show you how to do it using the coordinating stamps. So I have a stamp press here. I've been asked about what that is before. It's just a stamp press. And I'm just using that with the Blueberry Sky ink. I'm just going to ink it up. And when stamping with the dies, the main thing to do is to get overhead, look for the border edge after you see the ink on your actual stamp, and then press down. I don't show my hair in the process, but I'm definitely getting overhead and making sure it's lined up and then pressing down. The stamp press allows you to line it up because it's elevated a little bit, and you can do that. I do use regular acrylic box as well. You just need to hover over your die cut prior to pressing down, which is the same effect and technique of using a stamp press. The stamp press just allows it to rest in an elevated position without holding it up. So that's the perk of using a stamp press, but it's definitely not required because I've been using acrylic blocks for years with the coordinating dies, and I've been able to stamp with them just fine. But this is just another tool that you can add to your supply if you want to. Alright, so I've stamped my train in pure poppy ink, and now I'm going to move on to the next image. Again, make sure you hover directly over. A lot of times when I'm stamping onto die cuts or stamping in general, I stand up. So I stand up and I'm looking directly over. I'm looking for that outline edge. So since I'm stamping this right now is Enchanted Evening ink onto Vintage Cream ink, I'm going to hover over and look for that vintage cream border around it and making sure that's centered prior to pressing down. That's the best technique or tip I can give you to make sure you get a nice even stamp onto the actual die cut. Now, I do sometimes stamp and it's not exactly perfect, but it's okay if it's a little bit slightly off to the right, left, top, or bottom. But if it's completely off, of course, I re-die cut and stamp again. All right, for my last die cut here, I'm using Canyon Clay ink. All right, and now I have the propeller image that I'm going to ink up with this same Canyon Clay ink. And as you see here, I'm just using a plain old acrylic block to stamp that propeller directly onto that vintage cream cardstock. All right, so now that I have all of my images stamped onto the coordinating die cuts, I'm just arranging the die cuts in the order I want them to be on my garland. I didn't want those two blues to be together, so I divided them up with that red train. And now what I'm going to do is the next step I would have already die cut these, but for video purposes I already have them die cut. So this is safe for stepwise that you've already die cut them as well in the very first step. So you need to die cut 2 planes, 2 cars, 2 trains, and 2 little bus things. Okay? All right, so now I have some baker's twine here. This is just like the pure poppy and white color. And what I'm going to do is place the solid one, the unstamped die cut, underneath of the baker's twine. So I'm just going to use some liquid adhesive. You can use glue dots, hot glue gun, whatever that would adhere cardstock to the twine in a secure way. So I'm going to do the same for the remaining 3, but at first what I'm going to show you is how you just add the stamped finished die cut on top. So this particular technique of making your garland allows you to have a secure die cut because you have 2 pieces and you have a finished piece and an unfinished piece. So sometimes a lot of people do not have sewing machines or do not feel comfortable with sewing, and that is completely understandable. So this technique is a great way to be able to make your own garland without having to sew a stitch. You just use twine, you can even use ribbon, um, and other types of string that you would use to string your die cuts along a piece of garland. But what you need to do is sandwich that string, twine, or ribbon between 2 die cuts, and that's what will give you your little garland. You just sandwich them together. You have your base piece and your stamped finished piece. So as you can tell, if you were to have just pattern paper piece, you would have an unfinished piece, and then you would have a pattern paper, your finished piece on top. So there are different ways you can do this. This is, like I said, an example of how you can stamp onto your die cuts and make the garland. All right, my last one, I have a really hard time picking that one up. I'm just going to go ahead, secure that down. Whoops, okay. So I'm just going to make sure my adhesive is not poking out there. And here's my paper garland all done. And this is just going to add the propeller to the plane. I'm going to use a very tiny piece of foam adhesive here. It's a little foam adhesive dot. But I'm going to take my scissors and still cut it down some more because that propeller is very tiny. But I want it to pop up on top. You could also just use a glue dot or your liquid adhesive and adhere it directly onto that airplane die cut, and that would work as well. I just love dimension, so I'm always popping something off. And see, there it is. And if you see that it's a little bit of an overhang or something like that, I just take scissors and then snip around. Snip around until I can't see it as much. It's just not as visible. And if I snip too much of the adhesive off, that's fine. I just take some liquid adhesive and add it to my foam adhesive to give it some more tackiness to make it adhere like I'm doing right now, because I've cut a little bit too much off, too much of the foam part off that has adhesive on it. But the reason why I like foam adhesive is really because of the height that it gives me with using that foam. Okay, so I'm just going to turn this propeller around. That seems pretty good, like he's going to stay up in the air. And here's my paper garland. There's so many different ways you can incorporate this into your projects. Like I said, I'm going to show you two more examples and explain a little bit about each of them. But as you see here, they're just sitting up here. You can flip it around. You can hang it up. You can make a cake topper with this. Put it on two ends of like two skewers, tie them together, and decorate a cake like that. Imagine that for a little boy's birthday. That would be awesome. Put them on a card, which I will show you next. You can wrap them around a gift wrap, food wrap, something like that. Again, I'll show you. And just whatever you can think of to string this garland around and make anyone's day happy, it will really work great. So I'm just pressing them down just to make sure they're all adhered here. But this is really simple for you to do and a great way to use those dies in a different way. Okay, so here's my first card showing you how I use the little hot rod stamps and coordinating dies to die cut them all and string them on that baker's twine garland. I simply just put them on and added them to a card front. Since it was 4 pieces, I decided to make a landscape card because it fit the best. A portrait card seemed a little bit too jammed. I also adhered my garland using staples, a tiny attacher. You can adhere them in different ways, which I'll show right now. On this particular card, I adhered the garland using jute twine and buttons. So I wrapped the jute twine around the buttons and it just pretty much stayed. You can tie it into a knot. This card also shows an example of how you can use a different die, which are numbers, to create a garland and hang them up. Again, cake topper would be awesome for this because it has the year that the person is turning when you're baking those cakes for that special person's birthday. I think that would be really great. But this is an example of how it would look on a card. All right, so for the last example I have here is a gift wrap item, an altered item, and how you can stitch die cuts together with patterned paper, stamped pieces, or what have you. And I just ran the stitching using my sewing machine all the way through. You can do that as well and then just wrap it around. I used just a hinged tin can here that holds like a gift card and just tied a bow. Very easy to do, but packs a lot of punch for that gift recipient. So I hope you learned a lot today on how you can make your own garland. Thanks so much for watching. For Paper Tray Inc., I'm Ashley Cannon-Newell. Bye!